The rain hammered against the windows of Frankfurt International Airport as Officer Lars Vogel finished his coffee. His German shepherd Rex sat alert beside him, ears twitching at every distant sound. The night shift was always quiet, just the hum of baggage belts and the occasional late-night traveler. But tonight, something felt off. Lars stretched and glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. Another hour before his patrol ended. He rubbed Rex's head. "Ready for one last round, boy." Rex stood immediately, tail wagging slightly. They moved through the dimly lit baggage claim area, Rex sniffing methodically along the conveyor belts. Then, without warning, Rex froze. His ears shot up, his fur bristled, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Lars had seen this behavior before: drugs, explosives, sometimes even smuggled cash. But Rex wasn't just alert, he was agitated. "What is it, boy?" Lars followed as Rex lunged toward a lone black suitcase, unclaimed and unmarked. The dog scratched at it frantically, whining in a way Lars had never heard before. Not a trained signal, this was something else. Fear? Urgency? Lars radioed for backup, his gut twisting. Possible security threat at Carousel 4. Rex is indicating something unusual. As he waited, he knelt beside the suitcase. No tags, just a faded barcode. He pressed his ear against it, and then he heard it. A faint, weak whimper. Not a bomb, not drugs, something alive. The backup arrived within minutes. 2 armed officers and a supervisor, their boots echoing against the polished floor. Supervisor Hartman, a grizzled veteran with sharp eyes, took one look at Rex's behavior and nodded. That's not his usual alert. Something's wrong. Lars agreed. Rex wasn't trained to react like this. The dog was pawing at the suitcase like it was a door he needed to break down, his whines growing more desperate. Hartman ordered the area cleared, then carefully lifted the suitcase. It was heavier than expected. The moment he unzipped it, the smell hit them: damp fur, urine, and something metallic. Blood. Inside, curled in a tight, trembling ball, was a German shepherd puppy, no older than 8 weeks. Its ribs jutted out beneath matted fur, and its breathing was shallow. A deep gash ran along its side, crusted with dried blood. The puppy's eyes were barely open, but it flinched when Lars reached in. "Who the hell does this?" Lars muttered, lifting the fragile creature. The puppy whimpered, too weak to struggle. Rex immediately pressed close, sniffing urgently, his tail stiff with concern. Hartman checked the suitcase for clues. No ID, no note. Just a crumpled airline tag showing a route from Moscow to Frankfurt with a layover in Istanbul. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "Someone packed this dog like cargo." Lars wrapped the puppy in his jacket, feeling its rapid heartbeat. "We need a vet. Now." As they rushed to the airport's animal quarantine station, Lars's mind raced. Why would someone smuggle a puppy? It wasn't a rare breed, just an ordinary German shepherd. But Rex's reaction suggested something deeper. The older dog refused to leave the puppy's side, nudging it gently as if trying to keep it awake. The airport vet, Dr. Weber, took one look and paled. "This puppy's been sedated, poorly. Its system is crashing." She hooked up an IV, her voice tight with anger. "And this wound isn't from transport. It's a branding mark. See these symbols?" She pointed to faint, scarred lines near the gash. This was deliberate. Lars leaned in. The marks were crude but unmistakable. A series of numbers and a strange symbol. A chill ran down his spine. Like a serial number. Hartman's radio crackled. "Sir, we just got a call from Customs. 3 more suitcases like this one were flagged in Berlin last week. All had puppies inside, 2 didn't make it." Lars clenched his fists. This wasn't just smuggling, it was a system. Then Rex suddenly stiffened, growling at the door. A man in an airport staff uniform stood there, watching. "You found it," he said, his voice too calm. "That's unfortunate." Before Lars could react, the man bolted. Lars didn't hesitate. He handed the injured puppy to Doctor Weber and took off after the fleeing man, Rex surging ahead like a black and tan missile. The suspect darted through a service door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," his shoes squeaking on the linoleum as he rounded a corner into a maze of baggage tunnels beneath the airport. Lars radioed for backup as he ran, his breath coming in sharp bursts, the fluorescent lights overhead casting jagged shadows across the narrow passageways. Rex was gaining ground, his powerful muscles propelling him forward with single-minded focus. This wasn't just a chase. It was personal. The dog had seen that puppy's wounds, smelled its fear, and now his primal drive to protect kicked into overdrive. The suspect vanished through another door, and when Lars burst through after him, he found himself in a dimly lit cargo hold stacked with unmarked crates. The air smelled of oil and stale sweat. Rex snarled, circling a pallet of wooden boxes, his nose twitching at something beneath them. Lars drew his weapon. "Polizei, come out with your hands up." A shuffling noise came from behind the crates, then silence. Too much silence. Lars edged forward, pulse pounding in his ears. That's when the first gunshot rang out. The bullet ricocheted off a metal beam near Lars's head, and he hit the deck, rolling behind cover. Rex flattened himself beside him, ears pinned back. Another shot. This one closer. The shooter wasn't trying to scare them off. He was trying to kill them. Lars peeked around the crates and caught a glimpse of the suspect reloading a small pistol, his hands shaking. Not a professional, but desperate enough to be dangerous. "Drop the weapon," Lars barked. The man hesitated, then fired again. This time, Lars returned fire, aiming low. The suspect yelped as the bullet grazed his leg and he stumbled backward, dropping the gun. Rex was on him in an instant, knocking him to the ground with a snarl, his teeth inches from the man's throat. "Don't move," Lars ordered, cuffing him. The man's ID badge dangled from his shirt. Mikhail Petrov, cargo handler. Petrov spat out a curse in Russian, then switched to broken German. "You don't know what you're interfering with." Lars dragged him to his feet. "Enlighten me." Petrov's lips curled into a sneer. That dog was already sold. The buyer doesn't like delays. Lars tightened the cuffs. "Who's the buyer?" Petrov laughed, a hollow grating sound. "You think I talk, I end up like those dogs. Or worse." Backup arrived, swarming the cargo hold. As they hauled Petrov away, Lars noticed something clutched in the man's hand, a crumpled shipping manifest. He pried it free and smoothed it out. The words were in Cyrillic, but one line stood out. GS7. Delivery to Hafen 9. Final payment upon live arrival. Below it, a logo, a stylized wolf's head with a dagger through it. Dr. Weber called as Lars studied the paper. "The puppy's stabilized," she said, voice tense. "But there's something else. I ran a microchip scan. This dog isn't just some stray. It's registered to a military K9 breeding program in Poland. Stolen." Lars's blood ran cold. Someone wasn't just smuggling dogs, they were stealing trained puppies. But for what? Then Rex, still agitated, nosed at a nearby crate. Lars pried it open. Inside were stacks of veterinary sedatives, syringes, and, most chilling, a stack of collars fitted with tiny shock devices. This wasn't a smuggling operation. It was a training ground for something far darker. The warehouse at Hafen 9 loomed like a tomb in the pre-dawn gloom, its rusted metal gates hanging crooked on broken hinges. Lars crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, Rex pressed tightly against his leg. The air reeked of fish and diesel, masking fainter, fouler smells, urine, blood, and the acrid tang of fear. The shipping manifest had led them here, but nothing could have prepared Lars for the sounds. Whimpering. Not just from one dog, but dozens. A chorus of pain echoing from somewhere inside. Lars signaled the SWAT team moving in behind him. They'd gotten a warrant in record time after tracing the wolf head logo to a known enforcer for the Bratva, the Russian mafia. But this wasn't just about organized crime anymore. The military liaison on the case, a stone-faced woman named Captain Vogt, had shown Lars files that made his stomach turn. 8 K9 puppies stolen from training facilities across Europe in the past month. All German shepherds. All bred for intelligence and aggression. All vanished without a trace until now. A shout rang out from the warehouse entrance. One of Petrov's accomplices, a wiry man with a face like a weasel, was arguing with a guard. Lars caught snippets in broken German. "The American buyer is here early. The last shipment isn't ready." The guard shrugged. "So, wake up the trainer. Shock them until they obey. That's what he's paid for." Rex's growl vibrated against Lars's knee. The dog was trembling, not with fear, but with a barely contained fury. Lars had never seen him like this. Then it hit him. Rex had been trained in Poland too. He knew what those shock collars meant. The SWAT team breached the side door with a silent flashbang. Lars and Rex moved in, the stench of the place hitting them like a wall. Rows of cages lined the walls, each holding a German shepherd in various states of distress. Some cowered. Others threw themselves against the bars, their eyes wild and unfocused. At the far end of the warehouse, a man in a blood-stained trainer's jacket stood over a trembling puppy, a cattle prod in one hand. Lars didn't think. He fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "Polizei, drop it!" The trainer spun, but Rex was already airborne. The dog hit him like a freight train, knocking the cattle prod skittering across the concrete. The trainer screamed as Rex's teeth closed around his forearm, not biting, just holding. A perfect K9 takedown. That's when Lars saw the screens. An entire wall was covered with live feeds showing underground arenas across Europe. Dogs fighting, dogs dying. And in the corner, a list of names next to astronomical sums. Betting records. But the worst part? The logo in the top corner of every screen. A wolf's head with a dagger. The same one from the manifest. Captain Vogt appeared at his shoulder, her face grim. "This isn't just dogfighting. Look." She pointed to a map dotted with red pins. "They're targeting military and police K9 litters, stealing the ones with the strongest pedigrees." A file photo showed a familiar face. Petrov, shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit. "Because someone's building an army of attack dogs," she said quietly, "and they're willing to pay millions for the right bloodlines." A whimper came from the cage nearest Lars. A scarred female shepherd, her eyes dull with pain, nudged something toward the bars with her nose. A dog tag. Lars picked it up, his blood turning to ice. It read, K, 9 Unit 7, Warsaw. The pieces crashed together. This wasn't just about profit. It was sabotage. The trainer's laughter echoed through the warehouse like a broken record, his yellowed teeth gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights as SWAT officers dragged him to his feet. "You're too late," he spat, blood trickling from where Rex had pinned him. The next, shipments already gone. 12 dogs, prime stock, and you'll never find them in time. Lars clenched his fists, the dog tag from Warsaw biting into his palm. He'd seen that look before, the smug defiance of a man who knew he was beaten but took pleasure in knowing his work would continue. Captain Vogt stepped forward, her voice like steel. "Where?" The trainer just grinned wider. "Somewhere with hungry clients, the kind who pay extra for dogs that don't just attack on command, but enjoy it." A whimper cut through the tension. The scarred female shepherd, the one who'd given Lars the tag, was pawing at her cage, her eyes suddenly alert. Rex immediately trotted over, sniffing urgently at the lock. Lars followed, his instincts screaming that this dog knew something. When he opened the cage, she didn't bolt like the others. Instead, she went straight to a pile of shredded newspaper in the corner and started digging, her claws scraping against concrete. Then she stopped, looking up at Lars with an almost human intensity. Beneath the paper was a phone. Not just any phone. A military-grade satellite model, the kind used by private security firms. The screen was cracked, but it still powered on. And the last call logged was to a number labeled only as auction. Lars's blood ran cold. He'd heard whispers about these auctions. No physical location, no paper trail. Buyers and sellers connected through encrypted channels, bidding on everything from stolen art to black market weapons. And now, dogs. Captain Vogt swore under her breath as she scrolled through the phone's gallery. This isn't just about attack dogs. The photos showed something far worse. German shepherds fitted with custom vests, their eyes glazed from sedatives, being led through what looked like airport security checkpoints in different countries. Some vests bulged oddly, too square, too heavy. "They're using them as mules," she whispered, "training them to carry explosives or drugs through security. No one pats down a police dog." A sharp bark made them both turn. Rex was standing rigid, his nose pressed against a vent near the floor. The female shepherd joined him, both dogs growling at the metal grating. Lars knelt, prying it open with his knife. The space beyond was narrow, a maintenance tunnel. But it wasn't empty. A tiny black notebook was wedged in the corner, its pages filled with cramped handwriting, flight numbers, cargo manifests, and a list of names with sums next to them. One name jumped out: Volkov. Lars's breath caught. General Volkov was the head of a disbanded Russian K-9 unit, a man rumored to have sold military secrets to the highest bidder after his discharge. But he'd vanished 2 years ago. If he was involved... A shout came from outside. One of the SWAT officers burst in, his face pale. "We just got a tip from Border Patrol. A private jet took off from a hangar near here 20 minutes ago. No flight plan, but the ground crew said they were loading." He swallowed hard. "Crates, and the dogs inside were screaming." Rex let out a howl, a sound Lars had never heard from him before. It wasn't anger, it was grief. The female shepherd pressed against his side, her body trembling. And in that moment Lars understood. These weren't just cases anymore, they were partners, soldiers, and someone was selling them into hell. The trainer started laughing again. "Told you. Too late." Lars turned to Captain Vogt. "We need to track that jet." She was already on her radio. "It's headed south, toward the Mediterranean. Toward a country with no extradition treaties. Toward a buyer who clearly didn't care if the dogs survived the trip. And toward something else. A single word scrawled on the last page of the notebook in frantic, hurried letters. Armageddon. The private jet's last known coordinates burned in Lars's mind as the police helicopter roared over the Mediterranean, its searchlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Below, the black water stretched endlessly, hiding secrets beneath its waves. Rex panted heavily beside him, his ears flat against the deafening rotor blades, while the scarred female shepherd, now dubbed Shadow by the team, stood rigid at attention, her unblinking eyes fixed on the horizon. There was something unnerving about her focus, as if she could already see their destination. Captain Vogt's voice crackled through Lars's headset. Italian Coast Guard spotted debris field 20 clicks north of Lampedusa. Life rafts deployed but empty. No sign of the jet's black box. The words hung in the air. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to disappear. Then Shadow suddenly lunged toward the helicopter door, barking frantically. Before Lars could react, she clamped her jaws on his sleeve and dragged him toward a storage compartment beneath the seats. Rex joined her, scratching at the panel until it popped open, revealing a hidden military-grade tracking device none of them had installed. Its tiny screen flashed, with coordinates different from their flight path, coordinates now rapidly moving southeast, toward Libya, toward Volkov's last known stronghold. Lars' stomach dropped. The jet had been a decoy. The real shipment was already elsewhere. Back at HQ, the notebook's contents spilled across 3 interrogation rooms. Petrov broke a first, his bravado crumbling when shown photos of the dogs hooked to explosive vests. "We just trained them," he screamed. Volkov's people handled the modifications. The word sent a visible shudder through the hardened SWAT officers present. But the real breakthrough came from Shadow. When a Polish K-9 handler was brought in to translate her commands, the dog immediately assumed a defensive position and began signaling in a way that made the handler go pale. "She's not just military," he whispered. "She's Unit 0, Experimental Division. They imprint target sense into puppies' brains before their eyes even open." A video from Shadow's microchip, retrieved after a painful data extraction, showed grainy footage of General Volkov himself demonstrating a shepherd puppy reacting violently to a specific cologne. The same cologne worn by the German defense minister at last year's NATO summit. Rex's reaction was even more chilling. When researchers played audio from Shadow's chip, a series of high-pitched frequencies, he collapsed into a defensive crouch, whimpering like a puppy. The frequencies matched those emitted by the shock collars found in the warehouse. Conditioning triggers, the lead scientist realized. They're not just training attack dogs, they're programming sleeper agents. The implications detonated in the room. How many lost military dogs had Volkov already placed? How many were waiting for their triggers? Then the call came in from the CIA liaison. Satellite imagery showed heat signatures matching kennel trailers crossing into Tunisia. And with them, a convoy of vehicles carrying enough Semtex to level a city block. The pieces clicked into place. The dogs weren't the weapons. They were the delivery system, trained to seek specific targets, to nestle close, to ignore the weight of their vests, and to never, ever stop until they heard their frequency. Shadow nosed the notebook open to a previously overlooked page. A child's crude drawing showed a dog sitting beside a tall building. Scribbled beneath it in Russian, "When the tower falls, the puppies will play." The date matched next week's G20 summit in Berlin. Lars looked at Rex, then Shadow. Both dogs stared back with an eerie, knowing intensity. They'd been bred for war, trained for obedience. But in their eyes, Lars saw the one thing Volkov hadn't accounted for: loyalty. Not to handlers, not to commands, but to each other. And that, he realized with dawning horror, was why Shadow had really led them to that notebook. Because she wasn't just a defector. She was a warning. The scent of burning chemicals clung to Lars's nostrils as he stepped into the abandoned veterinary clinic on Berlin's outskirts, Rex and Shadow moving like ghosts at his side. The place had been gutted, files shredded, equipment smashed, but the stench of fear lingered beneath the antiseptic tang. Shadow's nose twitched violently as she led them to a hidden basement door, her claws clicking against blood-stained tiles. What they found below made even the hardened SWAT team members recoil, wall after wall of glass incubation chambers, each containing tiny German shepherd embryos floating in amber liquid, their developing brains hooked to electrodes. Captain Vogt's flashlight illuminated a chalkboard covered in chemical formulas and a single repeated phrase, "Obedience through pain, loyalty through terror." This wasn't just a training facility, this was a laboratory. Rex suddenly stiffened, his body vibrating with a low growl as he stared at a particular incubation pod. The nameplate read, Subject 7, Wolfspiegel. Lars's blood turned to ice. Rex's original military records listed him as K9 Wolfspiegel, discarded for uncontrollable aggression after attacking his handler. But the dates didn't match. Rex would have been just weeks old when these experiments began. The truth crashed over Lars. Rex hadn't failed his training, he'd escaped it. Shadow nosed open a hidden panel beneath the chalkboard, revealing a stack of ultrasound images. Each showed a puppy in utero with abnormal brain activity spikes. The notes beside them detailed scent imprinting via maternal stress induction, forcing pregnant military dogs to associate specific smells with electric shocks so their unborn pups would be born already hating that scent. Lars's hands shook as he flipped to the last page. A grainy sonogram showed two fetuses side by side, labeled Litter 7, Primary, Wolfspiegel, and Backup, Nachtmar. The dates matched Rex's birth, and the backup puppy's tracking chip frequency was identical to the signals that triggered Shadow. A crash echoed from upstairs. Shadow immediately body-slammed Rex away from the stairs as gunfire peppered the basement entrance. A voice shouted in Russian-accented German, "Destroy the samples first! The American buyer wants no traces." Glass shattered as Molotov cocktails tumbled down the steps, flames licking at the incubation pods. Lars and the team barely escaped through a sewer grate, but not before Shadow snatched something from the inferno, a half-melted USB drive stamped with Volkov's Wolfhead insignia. Back at HQ, the drive's decrypted files revealed a nightmare. Video logs showed Volkov's lead scientist, a former NATO veterinary surgeon named Dr. Reinhardt, injecting pregnant military dogs with customized scent compounds. Phase 1 complete. Reinhardt gloated in one clip, holding up a newborn puppy that convulsed violently when exposed to orange peel scent. The G20 security detail uses this in their aftershave. By Summit Day, every dog in Berlin will rip out their throats. But the real horror came in the final file. Security footage showed Reinhardt visiting a Berlin animal shelter 3 days earlier. The timestamp matched the exact hour Shadow had first appeared at the airport warehouse. She hadn't escaped Volkov's clutches. She'd been released, deliberately, because the backup puppy, Nachtmar, was already in position, and Shadow's real mission wasn't to warn them. It was to lead them astray. Rex's sudden, agonized howl split the air as analysts enhanced the shelter footage. There, in the corner of the screen, a young kennel worker scratched behind the ears of a seemingly ordinary German shepherd. The dog licked his hand affectionately, then calmly watched as the worker's other hand entered a code into the shelter's security system. A code that disabled all the cameras facing the G20 summit route. The date on the footage was today, and the worker's ID badge identified him as an intern from the defense minister's office. Lars's phone buzzed with an alert from Summit Security. The minister had just left for the venue, with his new rescue dog riding shotgun. The streets of Berlin blurred past as Lars's unmarked police car screamed toward the government district, Rex panting heavily in the back seat whilst Shadow lay unnervingly still beside him. The radio crackled with frantic updates. The defense minister's motorcade had just entered the G20 security perimeter, his newly adopted shelter dog passing through all checkpoints without suspicion. Lars' knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. They were too late. Even if they reached the summit in time, how could they expose Nachtmar without causing panic? One wrong move, and the sleeper agent might detonate early. Then Rex did something inexplicable. He lunged forward, his massive paws hitting the dashboard with enough force to crack the plastic, and let out a series of sharp, staccato barks. 3 quick, 2 long, 1 short. Shadow's head snapped up. Her ears pricked forward, and in that moment Lars understood. It wasn't a bark, it was a code, the same pattern repeated on the USB drive's audio files, Volkov's activation sequence for Unit 0 dogs. But Rex wasn't triggering the attack, he was overriding it. A call from Captain Vogt confirmed their worst fears. The minister's dog isn't wearing an explosive vest. The entire Summit Security K9 unit is. 47 police dogs stationed throughout the venue, each implanted with subcutaneous microexplosives during routine vet checks. Nachtmar wasn't the weapon. He was the trigger, trained to emit the exact frequency that would turn every security dog into a walking bomb the moment the first world leader stepped onto the podium. Shadow suddenly shoved her head into Lars's lap, her cold nose pressing against his wrist until he looked down. There, reflected in the car's rearview mirror, she deliberately blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Then she mimicked licking an invisible wound on her front paw. The realization hit Lars like a bullet. The blinking matched Unit 0's emergency shutdown protocol from the files. The licking motion? Reinhardt's notes mentioned biometric cancellation via saliva enzymes. Rex and Shadow weren't just trying to stop Nachtmar. They needed to physically touch him. The motorcade was already unloading when they skidded to a stop 200 meters from the security cordon. Through the crowd, Lars spotted the defense minister bending down to pet a handsome, friendly-looking German shepherd, Nachtmar. The dog wagged its tail, nuzzling the minister's hand. No one would ever suspect this affectionate creature had been engineered for mass murder. Then Nachtmar's head jerked up, his nostrils flared. He'd caught Rex's scent. The transformation was horrifying. 1 second, Nachtmar was the picture of canine loyalty. The next, his lips peeled back from teeth filed to razor points. His pupils dilated into black pits, and a guttural sound unlike any natural growl erupted from his throat. The minister stumbled back as the dog's odd muscles coiled. Rex hit Nachtmar at full speed, their bodies colliding with a sickening thud. The brothers rolled across the pavement in a snarling tangle, Rex fighting not to kill, but to pin. Shadow darted in, her tongue swiping desperately across Nachtmar's muzzle. For 3 terrible seconds, nothing happened. Then Nachtmar convulsed, his programmed aggression flickering like a faulty machine. His jaws snapped shut inches from Rex's throat and stayed there, trembling. A high-pitched whine built in Nachtmar's chest. The activation frequency. The surrounding police dogs stiffened, their own subdermal implants responding. Shadow lunged again, this time clamping her jaws around Nachtmar's neck in a precise hold that exposed his jugular. Not to kill, to access. Lars didn't hesitate. He plunged a syringe of enzyme-rich serum, extracted from Shadow's blood en route, directly into Nachtmar's carotid. The effect was instantaneous. The whine cut off. 47 police dogs simultaneously shook their heads as if waking from a dream. And Nachtmar went limp, his eyes clearing for the first time since puppyhood. He looked at Rex with dawning recognition and unimaginable sorrow. Somewhere in the crowd, a man screamed. Dr. Reinhardt, his lab coat flapping as he sprinted toward a waiting car. But Lars barely noticed because Rex was doing something extraordinary. He was singing. A low, rhythmic whine that rose and fell in waves, the same sound mother dogs use to comfort traumatized pups. And as he sang, Nachtmar began to whimper in harmony. Not a programmed response, not a trained behavior. A memory. The memory of two puppies huddled together in a dark lab, promising to protect each other no matter what the humans made them do. Shadow's ears suddenly swiveled toward the departing car. Reinhardt wasn't just escaping. He was on the phone, shouting two words that sent ice down Lars's spine. Activate Cerberus. The USB files had mentioned that name only once, a contingency protocol for when primary systems fail. And as the first explosion rocked a police kennel 3 blocks away, Lars realized the nightmare wasn't over. Nachtmar was just the beginning. The acrid smell of burning kennel bedding still clung to Lars' uniform as he raced toward the coordinates pulled from Reinhardt's abandoned car, an abandoned church on Berlin's outskirts, its crumbling steeple piercing the stormy sky like a skeletal finger. Rex and Shadow moved like ghosts beside him, their paws silent on the rain-slicked cobblestones. Nachtmar had been sedated at a secure facility, his body still trembling with residual programming. But as Lars pushed open the church's rotting doors, he realized they'd been led into a different kind of nightmare. The nave was lined with makeshift kennels, dozens of them, and inside each one, a German Shepherd puppy no older than 12 weeks. None reacted to their arrival. None even lifted their heads. Their eyes reflected the flickering emergency lights with an unnatural glassiness, their breathing perfectly synchronized. A mechanical hum filled the air, emanating from a jury-rigged transmitter in the pulpit. Reinhardt's final notes lay scattered across the altar, detailing Phase 3, Cerberus Ascendant. Lars's blood turned to ice as he deciphered the scrawled diagrams. These weren't just backup units, they were upgrades. Puppies raised without human contact, their brains wired directly to the transmitter. No need for scent triggers or shock collars. Just a single frequency that would turn them into a synchronized killing swarm. Rex let out a whine that morphed into something between a howl and a growl. His claws scraped against a metal plate embedded in the stone floor, a hidden hatch. Shadow immediately began digging at the edges, her nose twitching violently. The moment Lars pried it open, the stench of antiseptic and wet fur billowed out. A narrow staircase led down into darkness. The first step creaked under his weight, and suddenly 47 pairs of puppy eyes snapped toward the sound. Not in curiosity, in perfect, terrifying unison. The basement was worse, much worse. Rows of adult German shepherds stood motionless in harnesses, their shaved skulls revealing implanted neural ports. Wires connected them to a central console where a single red button pulsed rhythmically. A countdown screen above it read 002714. But the true horror lay in the far corner. A massive breeding cage held a gaunt female shepherd with fresh surgical scars along her belly. Rex froze. Then let out a sound Lars had never heard from any dog, a grieving, broken wail that echoed through the chamber. The mother. His mother. And judging by the dates on the breeding charts, she'd just delivered another litter. Shadow's sudden snarl snapped Lars's attention to the ceiling. Reinhardt stood on a catwalk above them, a sleek remote in one hand. "You're persistent, Officer Vogel," he called down, his voice eerily calm. "But you misunderstand. Cerberus was never about today's attack. That was merely quality testing." He pressed a button on the remote. Every neural port dog's head jerked upward simultaneously. The real shipment is already airborne. 324 puppies, dispersed to major cities worldwide. Imagine what happens when they all wake up screaming the same frequency at once. Lars's hand hovered near his non-lethal tactical equipment, a stun device and restraint kit. But Reinhardt anticipated the move. Any sudden shocks might trigger them prematurely. His smile widened as he nodded toward Rex. Though I am curious, Subject 7 was the only one who ever resisted imprinting. We thought it was a defect, but then his litter mates started responding to his howls during testing. He tapped the remote thoughtfully. What secret command did you bury in their DNA, I wonder? A crash echoed from upstairs. Captain Vogt and her team breaching the church. Reinhardt sighed. No matter, the sequence is already in motion. He raised the remote toward the pulsing red button. Shadow moved like lightning. She didn't leap for Reinhardt. She lunged for the female shepherd's cage, her teeth sinking into the lock. The moment the door sprang open, the gaunt dog erupted in a frenzy, not toward Reinhardt, but toward her wired-up offspring. She crashed into the first neural port dog, her jaws closing gently around its neck, and began to hum. The effect was instantaneous. The port dog shuddered, then mimicked the sound, then the next, and the next. A wave of soft canine humming spreading through the chamber as the countdown flickered erratically. Reinhardt's smirk vanished. Impossible! The maternal override was deleted from their... Rex's howl cut him off. A deep, resonant note that shook the ancient stained glass. Above them, the sleeping puppies in the nave suddenly stirred. One by one, they lifted their heads and joined the song. Reinhardt staggered back as the remote in his hand sparked and died. The countdown screen shattered. But Lars had no time to celebrate. Because through the church's shattered rose window, he saw it. A cargo plane climbing into the storm clouds, carrying 324 time bombs with fur and teeth, and no mother to sing them home. The roar of the military transport plane's engines vibrated through Lars's bones as he strapped himself in beside Rex and Shadow, the dim red cabin lights casting long shadows across the anxious faces of the NATO tactical team. Through the small porthole window, the first light of dawn painted the clouds blood red. Somewhere ahead in that vast expanse, the unmarked cargo plane carrying 324 neural-wired puppies was approaching its first drop zone, Istanbul. Captain Vogt gripped the satellite tablet with white-knuckled intensity as live feeds from 3 different intelligence agencies flickered across its screen. We've got 93 minutes until they reach Turkish airspace, she said, her voice tight. Once those puppies scatter across the city, we'll never contain the frequency. Lars glanced at Rex, who sat unnaturally still beside the team's communications officer, his ears twitching at every crackle of static through the headsets. The dog hadn't taken his eyes off the female shepherd, his mother, since they'd loaded her onto the plane. She lay sedated in a specialized crate, her breathing shallow but steady, the surgical scars on her belly still weeping, faint traces of blood where Reinhardt had harvested her latest litter. Shadow suddenly jerked upright, her nose quivering as she stared at the communications console. The officer frowned when she began pawing insistently at his equipment. "What's she?" The words died in his throat as Shadow's claws accidentally flipped a hidden switch, revealing a secondary frequency channel buried in their encrypted line. A channel currently transmitting a steady pulse that matched the Cerberus activation sequence. Lars's stomach dropped. "We've got a mole on this plane," he whispered. The tactical team immediately went rigid, hands drifting toward their non-lethal restraint gear. But before anyone could react, Rex lunged, not at the crew, but at the female shepherd's crate. His teeth clamped onto the metal latch, ripping it open with a screech that drowned out the engines. The moment the crate door swung free, Rex's mother staggered to her feet, her amber eyes blazing with unnatural clarity despite the sedatives. She moved with purpose toward the communications array, her jaws closing gently around the main transmitter, and bit down. The crunch of breaking circuitry was followed by an ear-splitting feedback whine that made everyone recoil. Then, through the dying static, a new sound emerged. A sound that shouldn't have been possible. The female shepherd was humming. Not the maternal lullaby from the church, but something darker, more complex. A melody that made Rex's hackles rise and Shadow drop into a defensive crouch. Captain Vogt's tablet suddenly lit up with emergency alerts. "We're getting reports from Berlin. The neural port dogs are having seizures." The live feed showed the once catatonic shepherds convulsing violently, their implanted ports smoking. But as Lars watched, something extraordinary happened. One by one, the dogs stilled. Then, in eerie unison, they turned toward the nearest security cameras and deliberately smashed them with their bodies. They're destroying surveillance, Lars realized. They're rebelling against their programming. The communications officer gasped, "Sir, the cargo plane. It's changing course." The satellite tracking screen showed the unmarked aircraft veering sharply north, away from Istanbul toward the Black Sea, toward Volkov's last known coordinates. Rex's mother let out a satisfied huff and collapsed, her strength spent. That's when Lars understood. The hum wasn't just a counter-frequency, it was a memory. The same memory Rex had accessed when he sang to Nachtmar. A memory of the original Unit 0 dogs turning on their handlers. Of a night when Volkov's lab burned to the ground. Of the reason Rex had been discarded. Not for disobedience, but for being the first to remember. Shadow abruptly stiffened, her nose pointing toward the cockpit. The pilot's voice came through the intercom, strained and metallic. "Brace for turbulence." But Rex was already moving, his body slamming against the cockpit door before anyone could stop him. The moment it burst open, the co-pilot spun in his seat, a syringe glinting in his hand. The tactical team subdued him in seconds, but not before Lars saw the wolf head tattoo peeking from his collar. The pilot, sweat pouring down his face, gestured frantically at the controls. "They're locked. The cargo plane's autopilot has been overridden remotely." Through the windshield, the horizon tilted at a sickening angle as their plane banked hard. Below them, the cargo aircraft descended rapidly toward the churning black waters of the sea. But it wasn't going down. It was rendezvousing. With a sleek, unmarked submarine breaching the surface like some primordial beast. Shadow let out a sound halfway between a howl and a scream. Because now they could all see the figures moving on the submarine's deck. Figures in hazmat suits, loading cages. Not for the puppies, for the dogs that had just rebelled. The submarine's deck was a flurry of activity as hazmat-suited figures moved with eerie precision, transferring the last of the puppy cages from the cargo plane's belly into the vessel's gaping hatch. From their altitude, Lars could see the truth the satellite images had missed. The submarine wasn't some rusting Soviet relic, but a sleek modern monstrosity with a hull coated in sound-dampening tiles that drank the radar waves like a sponge. The black water around it swirled unnaturally, suggesting propulsion systems far beyond standard naval tech. Captain Vogt's fingers dug into Lars's shoulder as she pointed to the markings barely visible beneath layers of grime near the conning tower. "That's not Russian. Those are Japanese characters mixed with Cyrillic." The implications settled over the cabin like a shroud. This wasn't just Volkov's operation anymore. It never had been. Rex's mother stirred weakly in her crate, her breath coming in ragged gasps. When Lars knelt beside her, her golden eyes locked onto his with terrifying clarity. Her paw scrabbled at the crate floor, leaving faint marks in the condensation. Not random scratches, but deliberate lines. Numbers, coordinates. Shadow immediately pressed her nose against the plastic, whimpering as she recognized the sequence. The same numbers had been burned into her shoulder during early training, the location of Unit Zero's first offshore facility, the place where the neural port technology was born. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, strained with urgency. "We've got maybe 4 minutes before that sub dives, and our fuel won't let us hover much longer." Lars's mind raced. Boarding the submarine was suicide. Letting it escape was unthinkable. Then Rex did something extraordinary. He nudged open the female shepherd's crate with his snout and began meticulously licking the wounds on her belly. Not just cleaning, stimulating. As the tactical team watched in stunned silence, the older dog's breathing steadied. Her muscles tensed, and with a strength that defied her injuries, she rose to her feet and marched to the rear cargo ramp, her tail held high. The message was clear. She was going, with or without them. Shadow darted to the equipment locker, dragging out a harness designed for military working dogs. She dropped it at Lars's feet, then pawed at a small waterproof case attached to the strap, a biometric scanner. Captain Vogt inhaled sharply. "That's NATO prototype gear. How does she—" The answer came in a flash of memory. Shadow's microchip had shown deployments at 3 NATO black sites before she vanished. She hadn't just been a Unit Zero dog. She'd been a double agent. The decision was made in seconds. Lars, Rex, Shadow, and the female shepherd would fast rope down under cover of a controlled engine flare that should blind the sub's lookouts for precisely 37 seconds, the exact interval Shadow indicated by tapping her paw. The rest of the team would provide aerial distraction while recording everything for intelligence purposes. As Lars clipped the harness around Rex's torso, the dog suddenly stiffened, his ears swiveling toward some sound only he could hear, a vibration, a frequency, coming from below. The moment the cargo ramp opened, the noise hit them like a physical blow, a pulsing, a tonal shriek that made the humans clutch their ears in agony. But the dogs reacted differently. Rex's mother threw back her head and howled in perfect counterpoint, her voice modulating into a complex harmonic that sliced through the artificial noise. Shadow immediately joined in, creating an eerie canine chorus that seemed to physically push against the sonic attack. Lars felt the vibration in his teeth, in his bones, as the sound waves collided midair. Then the submarine's deck lights flickered. The hazmat teams staggered. And in that moment of chaos, they repelled into the storm. Landing on the submarine's hull was like stepping onto a living creature. The metal thrummed with unnatural energy beneath their boots. Rex and his mother moved with single-minded purpose toward the open hatch, their bodies low and fluid. Shadow took point, her movements precise as she avoided the surveillance cameras Lars hadn't even spotted. They slipped inside just as the first warning klaxons began to blare, not for intruders, but for dive procedures. The submarine was preparing to descend. The corridor they entered was unlike any naval design Lars had seen. The walls were lined with what looked like incubation pods, each containing a floating canine embryo connected to a labyrinth of tubes and wires. The air stank of antiseptic, and something darker, something metallic and wrong. Rex's mother paused before one pod, her nose pressing against the glass. Inside floated a tiny shepherd fetus, its developing brain pulsing with eerie light. The label read, Litter 19, Cerberus Prime. A voice echoed from around the corner, speaking rapid Japanese-accented Russian. Final synaptic override in progress. The American delegation will receive their shipment in... The speaker rounded the bend and froze. A man in a lab coat, his face obscured by a breathing mask, stared directly at Lars. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the scientist's hand flew to his pocket. Shadow was faster. Her takedown was silent and brutal, her jaws closing on the man's wrist before he could press the panic button on his device. But the damage was done. Somewhere deep in the submarine, an alarm began to wail. Not the mechanical klaxon of a dive warning, something more primal, more canine. A howling, shrieking siren that made the very walls vibrate. Rex's mother reacted instantly, throwing herself against a seemingly random section of wall. The panel gave way, revealing a hidden passage, one reeking of fear and dog pheromones. The path to the holding cells. As they plunged into the darkness, Lars realized the truth. This wasn't just a submarine, it was a floating kennel, and the dogs imprisoned here weren't just experiments. They were the original prototypes. The ones who remembered everything. The hidden passage led them deeper into the submarine's belly, the walls vibrating with the eerie, pulsating howl of the alarm. The air grew thicker, the scent of wet fur and antiseptic replaced by something darker, rust, fear, and the metallic tang of old blood. Lars moved cautiously, his boots silent on the grated floor, Rex and Shadow flanking him, while Rex's mother limped ahead, her body weakening, but her determination unshaken. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, and what Lars saw there froze him in place. Rows upon rows of reinforced cages lined the walls, each holding a German shepherd. But these were no ordinary dogs. Their eyes held an intelligence that sent a chill down Lars's spine. Some bore scars from neural implants, others had limbs replaced with cybernetic prosthetics, and a few had been surgically altered in ways Lars couldn't comprehend. At the center of the room stood a massive console, its screens displaying real-time feeds of military bases, government buildings, and, Lars' stomach twisted, the G20 Summit Hall. These dogs weren't just prisoners, they were the control center. Rex's mother let out a soft whine and collapsed, her strength finally giving out. Shadow immediately pressed against her, licking her face, but the older dog's gaze remained fixed on Lars. Then, with the last of her energy, she lifted a trembling paw and pointed toward the largest cage at the far end of the room. Inside, a massive shepherd with milky white eyes and a heavily scarred muzzle sat perfectly still. The moment Rex saw him, his entire body stiffened. A memory. A recognition. The white-eyed dog stood slowly, his movements deliberate, and let out a single, deep bark that silenced the howling alarm. The other dogs immediately stilled, their ears pricked forward. Then, in unison, they turned their heads toward Lars. The white-eyed dog stepped forward, his claws clicking against the metal floor. When he spoke, Lars's blood turned to ice. Not a bark, a word. Vogel. Lars recoiled. The dog knew his name. The white-eyed dog's voice was rough, unnatural, the product of brutal vocal cord modifications, but the words were unmistakable. You came, like she promised. He glanced at Rex's mother, who gave a weak wag of her tail. We remember. We waited. Lars's mind reeled. This wasn't just about training dogs to obey. This was about giving them the ability to communicate, to strategize, to infiltrate. Shadow suddenly snarled, her body tensing as heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor. Reinhardt stepped into the chamber, flanked by armed guards, his face twisted in fury. But when his eyes landed on the white-eyed dog, His expression shifted to something like fear. "You were supposed to be decommissioned," Reinhardt hissed. The white-eyed dog bared his teeth. "You tried." Then chaos erupted. The caged dogs exploded into action, not with mindless aggression but with terrifying coordination. They attacked the guards' weak points, disarming them, tripping them, moving as a single, unstoppable unit. Reinhardt stumbled back, pulling a device from his coat, a neural disruptor. He aimed it at the white-eyed dog and activated it. Nothing happened. The dog didn't even flinch. "Your toys don't work on us anymore," he growled. Reinhardt's face went pale. You've been free this whole time?" "No," the dog said, stepping closer. "We've been waiting." Lars realized the truth then. These dogs had never been under Volkov's control. They had been pretending, gathering intel, waiting for the right moment to strike. Rex's mother let out a final, shuddering breath, her body going still. Shadow pressed against her, whining softly. The white-eyed dog bowed his head. She was the first to resist, the first to teach us how. Lars knelt beside her, grief tightening his chest. What now? The white-eyed dog turned to the console. "We end it." With a series of barks and gestures, the other dogs moved to the controls, their paws expertly navigating the keyboard. The screens flickered, then changed, displaying files, coordinates, encrypted communications. The entire operation laid bare. "The puppies on the plane are safe," the dog said. "We rerouted them. The humans who took them will find empty cages." Lars exhaled in relief. "And the neural port dogs? Free, like us." Reinhardt let out a strangled cry. "You don't understand. This technology, it could change everything." The white-eyed dog turned to him, his milky eyes burning with something ancient and fierce. "We are not your weapons." Then he did something Lars would never forget. He reached out with his paw and pressed the self-destruct sequence. Alarms blared. The submarine shuddered. "Go," the dog ordered. "Take Rex, take Shadow, tell the world what happened here." Lars hesitated. "What about you?" The dog's lips curled in what might have been a smile. "We were never prisoners." As Lars, Rex, and Shadow raced back through the corridors, the submarine groaning around them, the last thing Lars heard was the sound of howling, not of pain, of freedom. Moral lesson. This story reminds us that true loyalty cannot be forced, and intelligence should never be exploited. The dogs, though engineered as weapons, chose to protect rather than destroy, proving that even in the darkest of experiments, the bonds of trust and freedom are stronger than any programming.